What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we'll be going over the running backs I'll be trading for and away this week. We are fast approaching the trade deadline in most leagues. I want to say for most people it's going to be the week after Thanksgiving, but I suppose that depends on what you're agreed on, what platform you're playing on, but just be aware the trade deadline is approaching. For most of you, it's going to be around Thanksgiving, probably the week after. So we'll get into the running backs in a second, but first, of course, have to start things off as usual. Stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was through Sunday. What tight end had the most carries in the league? The answer is Jonnu Smith. Braven Hamden Music was the first to get that right on YouTube, and at Pistol Pete 22 was the first to get that right on Twitter. Today's stat. What running back has seen the highest rate of 8+ defenders in the box this season? All right, so we'll start off with the sell highs. But I want to give the exact same caveat as last week. When we're talking about running backs that you're trying to sell, it better be because either you drafted really well and you've got a ton of running backs that have worked out, not even drafted well, you just got lucky that a lot of your running backs have not gotten injured. So you've got a ton of them, you've got depth, you are maybe lacking in other positions, you want to swap running back to a running back needy team for an upgrade somewhere else. That is one thing you can do. Another thing is maybe you have one stud. You used to have two studs, but maybe one of them goes down with the injury, one of them busts, and so now you only got one. You're losing because you don't have depth, and you want to break that stud into multiple pieces. That's another scenario. I just can't really see a scenario where you're selling just to sell, just because a running back has a few good games, and you're like, I want to dump this guy for something else. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There aren't that many running backs that are producing, so make sure you're in like one of those categories beforehand, or if you're just like swapping. So if you just prefer another running back and you're doing like a running back for running back swap, well, that's fine because you're not actually losing at the running back position. But don't just like sell high on running back for like a buy low wide receiver and then just like have no depth at the running back position. Still a position that's not super deep. But assuming that you meet these criteria, the first up is Melvin Gordon. He scored again this week, but he only gained 3.8 yards per carry on 21 carries. He was once again pretty severely outplayed by Williams. It hasn't happened yet, but I continue to believe that they are going to shift more of the workload to Williams to close the season. When that does end up happening, Gordon is going to lose a lot of his value, so I would be selling high after 4 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks. There's also a chance that, right now they're technically in the playoff hunt, but look at that division, right? Even though they're in the playoff hunt right now, you've got Kansas City, you've got, I would say Kansas City and the Chargers are like the two top teams. You could argue that the Raiders are in there, but I would say Kansas City or the Chargers, with the Chargers being the heavy favorite to win that division. Like, Denver's not making playoffs, right? So they're going to be trying hard right now, but come the final, 2 to 3, maybe 4 weeks of the season, there's going to come a point when they're out of it, right? Where they're just simply not going to make the playoffs. And so if that ends up happening, they could go with a more youth movement, feature more of their younger players, figure out who they want to build around. Now, they have to know at this point they're going to build around Javonte Williams, but there could come a situation where they're not going to have Melvin Gordon next season, right? There's no way they're going to do that. And so think about if you're this organization and you're in the final weeks of the season, you're trying to evaluate players. Why are you giving Melvin Gordon a carry? You know he's not on the team next season. You're not trying to develop him. You're not trying to figure out if you want to keep him. Like, why would you give him a carry? Why would you give him a target that's a wasted carry, a wasted target that could go to someone else trying to evaluate their talent? And if that ends up happening, of course he's going to lose a ton of his value. So I just think you should be definitely selling Melvin Gordon, especially after all these touchdowns. I know this one isn't a fan favorite, but I don't understand how the Patriots can justify not giving Stevenson a consistent workload. It's been very strange to see. It's got to be something in practice with like fumbling or not picking up blitz pickups, like just something where like they know he's talented, but he still has to learn how to develop in a few different areas that we're not seeing. But we're at the point where it's like every time they give this kid the football, he's clearly their best running back. He's been performing, at least, even if you don't think he's better than Harris, he's been performing well enough where it's very justified to give him 10 touches every week. You should be giving him the workload because he's great in the receiving game. He's great at making people miss. He's a great running back, and you don't know what's going to happen, right? You know they're not going to throw the ball to Harris, but with Stevenson, they could easily feature him in the passing game. And so that, gives them a more balanced attack to where defenses don't know exactly what's coming. So I have to think that Stevenson, to close the season, and again, another thing like Javonte Williams to close the season, I think to close the season, Stevenson's going to get a significant workload on this offense, and that's going to come at the expense of Harris. And given all these touchdowns, he vultures a touchdown last week. Stevenson had, a great carry, a long reception, multiple great carries, but then he got gassed when they got within the 5-yard line. They give it to Harris. Harris vultures a touchdown on a drive that was all Stevenson. Moving forward, we're going to see more and more of these drives that Stevenson has used, and that's obviously going to come at the expense of Harris. I just think Stevenson is just too good to keep off the field. 16 touches for 33 yards for Harris this last week, 12 touches for 106 yards for Stevenson. He's a very good running back. He's going to be used. This is not an offense where there's just fantasy points to go around. So as they start mixing out of the players, it's going to hurt with the running backs. Also, they've had Houston. They've had the Jets twice. They've had a fairly easy schedule so far. Among the next 7 weeks, the Patriots have a matchup with the Browns, tough defense. The Colts, very difficult ground defense. The Bills, obviously a top 3 most difficult matchup. They play the Bills twice. They go on bye. So there are no more just cupcake matchups over these next 7 weeks, or there's very few. A lot of really difficult matchups, and so that's also going to be negative to Harris. But on to the buy low list, and I'm again going to break this down into 3 tiers. So tier 1 is going to be anyone 6-3 and better. I've expanded it a little bit because if you're 6-3, you're not a lock to get a first round bye, to finish first, second, even third, but you're in a really, really good spot. And tier 1 is basically just players who are in a good spot. Tier 2, anyone who's 5-4, 4-5, you're still in good position to make the playoffs as long as you close strong. If you're watching these videos, you likely have a team that peaks more in the later half of the season, so you're still looking good. And then tier 3, anyone who's 3-6, 2-7, you're in a position where you kind of need to not necessarily win out if you're 3-6, but you need to win a lot of the remaining games. So those are going to be the 3 tiers. And then ultimately, if you've got 0 or 1 win right now, you could theoretically make the playoffs. There are paths, but it's very close to impossible. And so the only suggestions I have is just shoot for the moon. Try and get some sort of deal done that shakes up your team, but understand it's incredibly unlikely you're going to make the playoffs. We don't really need to go over it all that much. So tier 1, top running backs I suggest trading for the high end of the price range this week. Dalvin Cook and Austin Ekeler, and then McCaffrey and Barkley, if you can get them on a discount. We'll kind of go over those 2 after. So Dalvin Cook, he has just 2 touchdowns on the season and has been very underutilized in receiving game, though they came out last week and they said they got to get him the ball more. I do think that his receiving upside might be a little bit lower than it was last season, but I think it's enough to where it's we should expect each week him to be getting 3 to 4 targets, which will turn into 2 to 3 receptions most weeks, and that's going to come with the potential for receiving touchdowns. He's talented enough where these are also sometimes schemed looks, and so we have the potential for 20 and 30-yard receptions, and so he's not a 0 in the passing game, but he's not Christian McCaffrey. I still think he's being utilized enough in that area, and I think it will expand a little bit moving forward to where he's good in the receiving games. We have that. He also had the touchdown call back last week. Of course, his week looks way different if he scores that touchdown, gets called back. Kirk Cousins, I believe, snuck that one in. But despite getting, pretty unlucky with touchdowns, the declining usage in the receiving game this season, he's finished as a top 14 running back in 4 of 5 healthy games this season. Once he starts finding the end zone, people are going to remember why he was a consensus top 3 pick this season. He scored 17 touchdowns through 14 games last year, 30 touchdowns over his last 28 games entering this season. The 2 touchdowns in 6 games is just randomness. But randomness will swing back in his favor at some point. He's going to have a multi-touchdown game. He's probably going to have a game where he's 150 yards and multiple scores. And his 5 touches inside the 10-yard line this last week, over time, that sort of usage will lead to 1, most of the time, 2 touchdowns. So he's getting very unlucky. Once the touchdowns come, he's going to be a stud. And don't worry about the injury. It's not like he went out there and he played 60% of the snaps, 80% snap share. So he was already back to normal. He's going to be playing 80-85% of the snaps on a ground-based attack, one of 4 players that they even use. He's a stud. you're going to want to be trading for him. And the other option, the other high-end option this week is Austin Ekeler. He was a chalk on DK last week because it was a pristine matchup. He's getting great usage. And then he busted. He only scored 11, I believe it was 11.2 full PPR points. But he was still given, 20 touches. He still ranks 5th in targets among running backs despite 0 in week 1 and already having his bye. So also, we look at moving forward, right? So he's getting great usage. He hasn't necessarily gone off yet this season, but the usage is there, and he's going to have a very strong end to the season. I don't think anyone's going to not know that. So the people you're trading for, yes, you're buying low because you had a disappointing week last week, but the people you're trading, for Austin Ekeler, they know he's going to be really good. I just think in general he's a buy, especially because the playoff hunt. So they're going to be in it. Like we just talked about, Denver's probably not going to be in contention. But the Chargers are not going to have this division on lock in weeks 15, 16, 17. They're going to be, I think they're going to win the division, but they're going to be up there among the division lead. And even if, they have the division on lock, they're still going to want to be playing hard for playoff seeding regardless, right? They want home field, obviously. So when we look at their playoff schedule, these are going to be games where they're very, very competitive in. They're trying to win. And it's Kansas City, the Texans, and the Broncos. So Kansas City week 15 will be huge. I expect Austin Ekeler to be incredible in that game, be used a ton on both the ground and the receiving game. He should go off. That's the first week of the fantasy playoffs. That is a huge matchup. Then he gets the Texans. He's probably going to have 100 yards, multiple scores. Then he has the Broncos. Another game in division. Now, maybe the Broncos will be out of it by that point, but Kansas City will be trying absolutely at their hardest, and it's a matchup that's a little bit easier now. It didn't look like it against the Cowboys, but it's a little easier now that Von Miller is no longer on the Broncos. But that's also a matchup where they're going to have to win that game, and in those types of games, they're not going to be giving carries and targets their backups. They're going to keep him healthy until this point, and they're going to have to unleash Austin Ekeler, and he's going to get a ton of touches. Those are 3 matchups I'm going to really want Ekeler, and so if you're looking for a high-end option, that's someone you really want to be looking for because of great matchups in the fantasy playoffs. Then I'll just mention McCaffrey and Barkley. Shouldn't need to convince anyone too much, telling them that, these guys are really good at football. Of course, they're good at fantasy football. McCaffrey comes back this last week, had a pretty decent workload. The split between him and Hubbard was actually pretty wide, so there were reports that came out that McCaffrey was going to be on a snap count, and that came true. He was on a snap count. But I was expecting Hubbard to be used a little bit more. They went to actually other running backs behind him. To me, it just further solidifies every single week McCaffrey's going to get more and more work, and it's going to become the point where he's right back to what he was before. Hubbard is not going to be someone who's mixing in for drives. They're going to feature McCaffrey. I'm not worried about the receiving game usage. It was clearly just, hey, he's on a snap count. We can only use him in certain scenarios. We just want to make sure he's fully healthy. Also, they were getting absolutely demolished. There was no reason to throw him out there for a ton. But then even that, they still gave him his snaps. So they were getting crushed in the second half of that game, and they still gave McCaffrey a decent workload when the game was way out of hand. So they were clearly working him back, clearly not afraid to throw him out there. He's going to be fantastic. The one thing I want to talk about with McCaffrey is the playoff schedule. At Buffalo, versus the Bucs, at New Orleans. Those are the 3 most difficult matchups you can have for a running back, and he has all of them in the fantasy playoffs. And one of them at Buffalo, another one at New Orleans. That's brutal. So if you don't want to trade for him because of that, that's totally fine. I would just say, if the McCaffrey owner in your league is shopping him, it's still Christian McCaffrey. He is matchup proof. He could go out there and have 7+ receptions in every single one of those games. And then you're like, oh yeah, he's Christian McCaffrey. I forgot about that. Sometimes we forget when players miss a lot of time, especially miss a lot of time last season, a lot of time this season. He's a stud. He's someone that can go out there and get you 40, be the highest scoring running back by 20. It's a pretty big edge. And so I'm not afraid to trade for him. I just wanted to mention it to make everyone aware of the fact that that is coming up. And as for Barkley, I'm expecting him to return after their bye in week 10, so you're not going to have him this next week. And I would expect him, as soon as he returns, to go right back to like 80, 85%, maybe even 90% snap share. Virtually all the running back touches. That's what Booker was getting. He's significantly better than Booker. I'm not concerned about any of the other running backs. As soon as Barkley is back, he's going to be featured. And how many running backs in the NFL are featured at this point? With the extra game this season, we have seen a significant number of teams not featuring one running back, choosing to go with a committee, choosing to not give their running back 25 touches. Well, when you have running backs that are returning now from injury that are capable of that, it creates a significant edge at the position, something that you need to be looking into. Again, I'm not overpaying for these two, especially with Barkley. We don't technically know. There's a little bit that we don't know from the injury, but let's be honest. If you can get them for a good cost, I'd be trying to do that. If you're in tier 2, so you're either 4 and 5, 5 and 4. I think your top options are everyone I just mentioned first, and it kind of goes like that. So I'm always looking for those 4 players first. Then if you can't get those guys, our boys, of course, Michael Carter and Javonte Williams, but only if you can get them at a discount. Just use like the trade values on the website as a trade calculator. Add up the value you're getting for the value you're giving up. See if you get a value there. I just mentioned that for these two in particular because they've been playing much better lately. People are starting to realize how good they are. And so I just don't want us to overpay. I don't want you to be like, oh, Nick said you have to get him at all costs. And now I'm giving up, 2 wide receiver 2s for Javonte Williams. No, I wouldn't do that. I just think that if someone thinks, oh, he had a good game, but it's not going to continue, no, I think it's going to. And I think he's going to peak later in the season. And so I still think Carter and Williams are players we can be buying right now, but only if we're getting a value. You should have done that weeks ago and gotten an even crazier value, but if you didn't, you can still buy them. Just make sure you're getting them at a value, and again, according to the rest of these rankings on the site. Aside from those two, I'd also trade for Antonio Gibson, but it's certainly a risk. So know that. Know this one is risky. As per usual, again, I prefer everyone that we just mentioned before, but if you can't get those guys, Gibson's an upside pick, and he's not going to cost you all that much. There is not a team out there that has Antonio Gibson that is asking a ton for him, being like, nope, he's my guy, I love him. Anyone who drafted Gibson is not feeling that way right now. His managers are fed up, and so it should be easier to get a deal done. He's obviously still dealing with the shin injury. I think he's going to have this injury all season, but he's had the bye week to rest up, and he was actually off the injury report before the bye. Now, teams lie all the time. He was definitely still injured for that game. And his touches, his snaps, his production is all kind of fell off a cliff since this injury. And it could be a committee rest of the season. They could look at this and say, hey, this is a guy for our future. We're not going to win this season. Let's just make sure he doesn't suffer like a career injury. Let's make sure he's good to go. Let's just use a committee. Get out of this season. We can move towards featuring him next season. That can happen. But what could also happen is, after their bye, he could come out closer to full health. He could be a guy that, maybe they still need to figure that out. Like, we think he's going to be part of their future. We think he's going to be someone that long-term they want to feature. But maybe they're not convinced right now. Maybe they're not convinced he can be their feature back. And so maybe, if he gains full health, they want to test that out to close the season. Hey, can this guy hold up to getting 15 to 17 carries plus a few targets every week? They said at one point that they want him to be their featured running back. Is that still true? Well, we don't know, but it's possible. And if he can be featured to close the season, you're getting him a huge discount right now. Faces the Eagles twice in the fantasy playoffs. That's a really good matchup for opposing running backs. And if this team goes with the youth movement, well, he'd be part of that. Note that he does play Tampa Bay this week, which, as you know, is like a top 3 matchup in terms of difficulty for the running back position. So this could be our classic, send an offer this week that is clearly in your favor. Expect it to get rejected, but be pumped if it gets accepted. Okay, it'll probably get rejected. But then you're already opening up the talks, right? And so if he goes out there against the Bucs and predictably has a pretty mediocre game, you're going to be the first person that person is looking to for the trade. You're already going to have one trade on the table, and they're going to be more willing to give you a good discount because he played poorly, went on bye, played poorly, and they're just going to be like, I'm done, right? I'm giving him away now. Doesn't necessarily have to work out. He could go out there and score multiple touchdowns, but at least you're opening up that potential that he has another down week, and you're getting him really cheap after that. Finally, we have our tier 3 teams. So anyone that's 2-7 or 3-6. For those teams, it's anyone in tier 1, then Carter and Williams. I probably wouldn't go with the Gibson route on this one. You could if you truly believe in the talent and you think he's going to be featured, but I would probably stick to like the tier 1 guys, Carter and Williams. And then if you can't afford to do that, you've got to be going to options like A.J. Dillon and Mark Ingram. Dillon's been playing about 40% of the snaps and has looked really, really good on the ground. And, he's not someone that we're like, he always gets work in the receiving game, right? He's not known for his pass catching, but he's capable. And that's important because if Aaron Jones were to get injured, A.J. Dillon is now a matchup-proof running back 1. I literally don't care who they'd be playing. He's a running back 1 with a top 5 ceiling every single week. I don't know exactly. That'd actually be interesting to think about. Where would A.J. Dillon be ranked in like a neutral matchup? Aaron Jones is out. Where's A.J. Dillon? My guess is he's probably in that running back like 7 to 8 range. So that's the ceiling. And if you're 2-7, if you're 3-6, you probably have to expose yourself to that ceiling, especially if your answer to, like all those other running backs I was trading for is like, I can't afford them. I can't afford to trade for a running back 1. I can't really get my hands on Carter Williams. And you're this bad in terms of record, like you have to expose yourself to that upside somehow. And so I would do that through A.J. Dillon. And honestly, he's not even an awful option. Like you, of course, don't want to be starting Dillon while Jones is still healthy because like the upside is only so high. But it's not the worst option in the world. He's a fine low end too, and you get that upside. And it's the same thing with Ingram. Of course, like who would we prefer while the starter's healthy? It's Dillon. Who would we prefer if the starter went down? It's Dillon, right? Like Dillon's still the better option, but Ingram is significantly cheaper, and he's still going to be fine. He's still going to mix in for some work while Alvin Kamara is healthy, but that's not why we're trading for him. We're trading for him because if Alvin Kamara suffers a high ankle sprain, you've got running back 1 production for the next 4 to 6 weeks from Mark Ingram, and you gave up virtually nothing for him. Those are the trades you kind of need to be doing if you are 2-7, if you are 3-6, and you can't trade for like Dalvin Cook, Austin Ekeler, McCaffrey, Barkley. And these are the 2 I would do. You could also do Pollard. You could also do guys like Madison, but my preferred options are Dillon and Ingram for this week. So that'll do it for the running back trade targets video. If you liked the video, well, be sure to leave a like. And remember, you can always see my exact rest season rankings, which are now updated to be used as a trade calculator. So you can come up with your own trade examples at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. That, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.